get them on tape. I love it.
Yes. Listen, this special show of Speak Out World, the Lunch Counter, is a rare opportunity to hear and us speak, right? And the people behind the scenes of Speak Out World. So don't go away. We'll be right back with more Speak Out World. Welcome to Speak Out. Listen. You know, Dino, we always start the show off with a quote, and we recently lost an amazing hero to civil rights, Congressman John Lewis. So I want to start off with a quote from him that will tie in our subject and introduce our guest today, okay?
All right.
So the quote is, "Get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and help redeem the soul of America." And I think that's where we're at today, helping to redeem the soul of America. And today we're going to talk about the importance of voting.
Yes.
And how that will help us redeem the soul of America and get into some good trouble. Our guests today on Speak Out World are two women behind the scenes that help to make this podcast possible, you all. Dino, you know, we have the very wonderful and beautiful producer of Speak Out World, Anise, joining us today for the conversation.
Thank you.
And we have our technical producer of Speak Out World, who is also an Emmy award-winning producer, Sharon Phillip, aka Shay Shay.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's so wonderful being able to see you all and interact with you all on screen. And Dino and I are so used to interacting with you all behind the scenes.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a little interesting being in front of the camera, but I'm feeling good that it's with family, so it's all good.
And I want to thank you all for inviting me to sit at the counter.
Yes.
Discuss at the counter.
Yes.
Started one of the icons of the civil rights movement was at the lunchroom counter, so it's an honor to be at the counter.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that's what this special lunch counter Speak Out World is all about. In terms of us coming together, we're going to have a lunch counter moment, even though we're not eating, because it's hard for us to eat and have a conversation. Let's just be real. But it is a moment for us to all come together as one at the lunch counter, and really for the first time as podcast hosts and producers really discuss a topic that's important to us. And that topic right now is dealing with voting. Mm-hmm. So, Dino, I'm going to pass it off to you and to get the conversation started with, our lovely guests, Shay Shay and Anise.
Shay Shay, let's start off with you.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's so important now, more than ever, for us as people to vote, especially people of color?
Well, it's very important. I believe that we each have a voice, and the only way to make our voices heard is through the voting process. And I've found that too many times you see it a lot now, people in minority communities are, discouraged from voting, or we're told our voices really don't matter or things will never change. But the only way that we can stand up for change and make sure that we're moving in the right direction is for everybody to use that voice for change. And it means a lot to me, the sacrifices that Congressman John Lewis made for us. And he was beaten, almost killed several times, and fought and gave his everything for us to have this privilege of voting. And for us to throw it away and not use it, to me, feels like it would be very disrespectful to his memory.
Anise, what do you think about the importance of voting, especially in this upcoming election?
Well, let me just give a shout out to Chicago, because I am.
Shout out.
Outside.
And one of my heroes with the subject of voting. I'm looking at the menu at the counter, and that is Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells was a reporter in Tennessee, and she stood for civil rights during the lynching of Black men and women, and she relocated to Chicago and was part of the Chicago Defender. And Ida B. Wells, as my shero, was one of the organizers for the Black women first Suffolk clubs in Chicago in 1913.
Wow.
Wow.
And during that particular time, she represented delegates of Illinois when they marched on Washington in 1913. And during the march on Washington, they wanted the Black women to march in the back. But Ida B. Wells refused to march in the back. She wanted to march with the Illinois delegates. And she came in front of the line with the Illinois delegates for the women's suffrage in Washington, D.C. And so she stood for us during those times, and she just became my hero from the Chicago area.
Wow. When you think about Ida B. Wells, you mentioned the fact about how she stood for anti-lynching and what was going on. And let's keep in mind that I know, I'm not sure who all on the panel, but I don't know, Shay, if you've ever been to Montgomery, to the museum, and it had people who were literally hung for the right to vote, so for that equality. And so when we begin to think about the blood that was shed, even before John Lewis, there were numerous people that just wanted to register to vote. And I mean, that's what they were hung for. And some of them, their entire family, they would get their entire families. You can read the names. And I remember one that really moved me. He went to register to vote, and he was hung, and his children, they were hung for the right to vote. And so I'm very, having been involved in civic engagement and voter registration, like this is something that's really important to me, because it goes beyond just talking about who's going to be president, but it's about who are you going to put in office, or, on local levels that are going to make decisions about, clean water, clean air. Here in Georgia, the schools and all that. I mean, those are important issues, and those are issues that are on the ballot that if you don't vote for them, then you're not having a voice when it comes to your community. And so, I mean, that's what we're here about, having a podcast, Speak Out World, and voting is important to not only the United States, but even across the seas. The fact that people died and bled in order to be able to have their voices heard. Dino, you want to jump in? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Anise.
That was one of the things that Ida B. Wells represented in the city of Chicago. They were able to get people to represent the Black community in the city of Chicago, to be councilmen, to represent the South Side, the West Side. Oscar DePriest was a councilman in the city of Chicago, and they were progressively doing many things. Quincy Chapel, which was part of the Underground Railroad for African Americans moving from the southern states through going to Canada. All those things took place in Chicago, and Ida B. Wells was a part of having those civil rights grow for those Blacks who were coming up from the South that were dealing with the segregation and dealing with the lynching and the speaking out their First Amendment rights as citizens of the United States after the Civil War. So
what are some of the ways that voter suppression is being utilized right now to prevent people of color from voting?
I think the number one thing is what's going on right now at the post office. We're in the middle of a pandemic. For our safety, they're pushing us to do absentee ballots. Yet you have someone in position who is making all these drastic cuts to the post office. Things are already, how should you say, delayed because of the pandemic. You know, everybody's home. We're using the post office more because we need our groceries, just everyday things mailed to us. But you're cutting services at the post office right before the election. And that has a cascading effect on absentee voting, because when you cut the services, of course, mail is going to be delayed. Our voter registration, our absentee ballots are going to be delayed. And now we're finding out if they're delayed, they won't be counted. You could have made these cuts if you still felt they were necessary, but after the election, you have people in rural counties or people in poor counties that don't have public transportation that rely on these absentee ballots. If you take that away from them or you make it more difficult, their voices, sometimes people will either throw their hands up and say, well, what does it matter? You're not going to count my vote anyway, or they just feel discouraged. And that to me is a form of voter suppression. You know what I mean? It's like closing polling offices, right? Or polling locations in these heavily populated communities where you have one polling office open. And you know, it made the news several times here in Georgia that people were out there trying to vote until like 1 a.m. They had to bang on the doors and get leaders to open up for them to vote because they closed other polling locations. It's just these little tactics. I know I can't prove it, but in my heart, I know that this is a deliberate form of voter suppression.
And what's so sad about it too, Sharon, is the fact that we are celebrating the 55th year anniversary of the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah.
You know, so here it is, instead of being able to, as a nation, really come together and say, we're celebrating the Voter Rights Act. This is 55 years. 55 years is not a long time, you know, and so to be in, to live in a world where we have a major election going on, and to have the voter suppression that we're having right now on this anniversary, you know, if I'm not mistaken, also of women getting the right to vote. All of these anniversaries are being celebrated this year, but yet instead of us really being able to celebrate it, we are facing a number of voter suppression, which is all the more reason why we need to make sure that we get out to vote. And I know on behalf of Speak Out World, we have, you know, we came together to be able to bring inspiration stories, and we will definitely get back to that. But rarely have we had a chance as producers to be able to use our voice to really speak about some of the things. I mean, I know Dean and I have written some poetry regarding this, and you all have definitely attended. We've all attended different protests, but I mean, it's just such importance right now that we really need to just let folks know that here it is in America on all the cuffs of these anniversaries, and we're feeling the suppression more than ever before, as we did 55 years ago.
And in the midst of a pandemic, they're making it more difficult for minorities, especially, to vote, for people of color. So my suggestion is to make sure that you utilize your right to vote. If you're not voting by mail, please make sure that you utilize early voting to be able to go to the polling places and cast your votes. Do not wait until the day of the election and try to vote in person. If you do, you're going to face lines 4 to 5 hours long because it's already in the works for that to happen.
Yes.
So be wise. There are going to be early voting days. Utilize one of those days. It's a pandemic, so many people aren't working. You have the opportunity to stand in line for an hour or two. I don't care. I heard someone say this. I don't care if I have to crawl. I don't care if I have to shuffle. I don't care if I have to skip. I don't care if I have to dance. I don't care if I have to run. Whatever I need to do, I'm going to make sure that I vote because
That's
I
right.
realize how important my vote is in this election. So
Yeah.
we have to all be on one accord and realize that this Voting Rights Act is just that. It's an act. It's not a law. So we have to make sure that we follow through and make the necessary changes that we have to make. And in order to make the changes, it's not just the protests that are going on in the streets. That's very important.
Yeah.
But those protests must be utilized as votes in order to make changes in our society.
Exactly.
So what do you see as some of the most important aspects or reasons to vote right now in this election?
Woo.
Well, I like to say voting for your local people, state,
Mhm.
and federal.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, we don't realize how important all those levels of government affect our lives.
Yes.
Agreed.
Exactly.
Agreed.
Voting on the school boards. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yes.
being a part of, and because you are a United States citizen, you can be a part of any of it on your local or your state or the federal level.
Yes. Yes.
And what? Yeah, and when I was talking about the Clean Water and Air, I couldn't think of it at the time, but the Public Service Commission, I definitely know here in Georgia, they are responsible for that in terms of having that committee to make sure that there's clean water, clean air. And most of the times it's rural communities that are being affected by not having clean water and clean air. And so we need to make sure that our voices are heard with that. You know, they have different questions on the ballot in terms of, you know, do you think more money should go towards the school system for this, or do you think that we need to have taxes on that? Like, it's more than just checking off a box for, you know, who's going to be the president, like you all were saying. In Georgia, you have 159 counties here.
Yeah.
159 counties, and each county has its own board, its own sheriff, its own, you know, all of those things. And so, I mean, we cannot allow any type of suppression. It's just like what you said, Dino. I mean, run, crawl, you know, whatever you have to do, you have to get in early. And if you're not registered to vote, I know that we as a podcast, we are worldwide. We are stationed, however, in Georgia, in the state of Georgia. You have until October 5th to register to vote. And, you know, early voting starts here for the November 3rd election, October 3rd through October 30th. So you have all these days and then if you want to get involved to become a poll worker, you know, make sure that, you know, you want to make sure that every vote counts, become a poll worker and find out how to become a poll worker in your county or in your state or in your district, wherever you are, whatever state that you're in, and make sure that you are there to be a part of the process, that every vote counts. Sharon, Shay, did you want to add something?
Well, I agree with everything that you've all said. And one of the things that I think is very important as well, especially now that we're in a pandemic, we may have less poll workers or, you know, but they need to be educated because, and listening to the news just last night, we've had some officials that were actually on the ballot who went to vote early in the runoffs, and they were Republican candidates, but they were told, oh, there's no Republican runoff, but there was. Now, I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent.
Absolutely.
All the poll workers need to be educated. Regardless of who you're voting for, you need to speak up and use your voice. But if I go to vote, if I'm not an educated voter, right, and I go to a polling place and they're like, oh, we're not having a runoff. And suppose I'm the kind of person that, oh, okay, maybe I made a mistake and I just turn around and go home. I just lost my opportunity to vote. So we as citizens, we as poll workers, everybody has to be knowledgeable about the process, who's running for what office, things that are going to be on the ballot that we need to vote for clean water, schools, benefits for underprivileged families. We just need to make sure we're educated. And there's a lot of negative stuff going around in the news, but we have to be able to sift through that and see which is garbage and which is fact, because there's a lot of negative propaganda going on right now in the news. And it's all to dissuade us from voting, right? But it can backfire. So it's up to us to be knowledgeable about what we're going to the polls to vote for.
Speaking of propaganda.
Yeah.
That's part of voter.
Go ahead. That's another form of voter
Yes,
suppression.
Definitely.
Yes.
Did you realize that Russia has already started a ploy of voter suppression, trying to bring out different stories regarding the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, about things that happened in the Ukraine, things that happened during the Obama-Biden administration. All of these things are being handled through the Congress, though, from Russia. They're not coming on the media. They're actually feeding information to the congressmen through the Senate. United States are taking this information and running with it. So what are your thoughts about some of the other forms of voter suppression? It's not just closing polls, but it's also the propaganda that's being sent out, not only through the United States, but through other nations as well.
Well, Dino, I think the fact too that it was not properly addressed, and not that Congress did not try, but it was not properly addressed regarding Russia's interference with the 2016 campaign, and thus this is the reason why there's such boldness in terms of handling the 2020 election. Even to the point, I mean, Sharon, to your point, when you start talking about being educated, I know that there's been talk about Kanye West being on the ballot, and some folks are thinking like, okay, this is going to split the vote. But what they, listen, Kanye has a right to run if he wants to. Yeah, that is his right to run. Yeah. However, if you want to be an educated voter and you really want to see what's going on, you realize that is also supported by an opposite candidate. Yeah. So, vote for him is not splitting the vote as much as it is voting for the 45 that's already in. And so I think that we are a lot more sophisticated as voters, as American voters, Black, white, Asian, it doesn't matter. I hope, and I'm believing, I'm very optimistic that we are a lot more educated in that sense, that we understand, like, okay, we understand what this trick is about, and that it's not about like, vote for Kanye for president as if you're voting for a school president of a high school. This is not how it's working, together. And these, you have a comment. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was like, that's not how it's working. And what they're doing is putting fear in the voters.
Yes.
They're using fear as part of the propaganda. But we have to learn how to push past our fears.
Yes.
That's what the wisdom of those who are gone before us, like John Lewis, Ida B. Wells,
Fannie Lou Hamer.
Vivian. We can name Martin Luther King. We go past the fear, because we have to keep our eyes on the prize
Yes.
Yes.
for all of us to become equal citizens in these United States.
Mhm.
It is united, not separate.
Yeah. And another thing that bothers me about like current administration is the divisiveness.
Yes.
You know, it's been very eye-opening for me over the last few years, some of the things that have gone on in society, but no more so than 2020. And, you know, I always felt like we were all coming together. We've come so far. Racism was on the down cycle. No, it's not. We need
No.
somebody in office at both local and national levels, right? That can bring us together. There's a lot of stuff going on with the Native American communities.
Yeah.
And it's like people don't even talk about them, but they're suffering, right? They don't have water in some of the reservations. You have they're women, people are being abducted, they can't find them. You know, there are all kinds of stuff going on in these other communities. Nobody ever focuses on them. And I used to be one, and I had to apologize one day when I actually thought about it. I was one of those people that thought all lives matter. And then somebody said something to me and it dawned on me. All lives cannot matter unless Black lives matter, Native
Right.
American lives matter, Latino lives matter, gay, LGBT community.
And trans,
It's like,
yes.
I can't go out there and say all lives matter if I'm not fighting for everyone's rights to be
Absolutely.
equal. You know, I'm not better than anyone else. And it's like, if you think about it, all of us have that same fight. We've always been on the outside. People always took us for granted. We've always been suppressed. But it's time, if we come together, these communities, we have what it takes to change the world moving forward.
And I think a change is actually in the midst
Yeah.
of what's happening in our country, and not only in America, but around the world. You can see the protests that are fighting against inequality.
Mhm.
When you look at something as simple as voting rights, and you look at the state of Florida, there's 775,000
Wow.
convicted people who have served their terms who do not have the right to vote unless they pay their court costs. Now, this has just happened over the last month.
Mhm.
We have athletes that are stepping up to the plate, and other actors and celebrities are stepping up to the plate. LeBron James has donated over $100,000 for the right to pay these court fees for these convicted felons who have served their time and who have done their probation in order for them to have the right to vote. Michael Jordan and the Michael Jordan Fund has given $2.5 million
No.
to fight against racial injustice so that we have the right to vote. People have to understand the importance of having that right, but not only having it, but utilizing that right.
Yes.
It is the courts, it is the judges, it is all of these smaller decisions that are happening in our communities, in our states, that affect what's happening in our country. So what do you think needs to be done at this point to encourage people to come out, Julia, and vote?
Well, I think, and I know that we're running out of time, but I'll tell you this. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up, and we're just going to continue this conversation so that we can have a part two. So now on part two, we can start talking about some of the solutions. How does that sound to everybody?
That's good.
All right. So listen, I want to thank all my guests. We're not going away. We're just going to continue this conversation. Thank you for joining us on Speak Out World. And don't forget that you have a voice. So make sure everybody, 1, 2, 3, speak out.